Hi. The poem that I'm going to look at today is To Autumn by John Keats, and of all the poems in the anthology, this is my personal favourite. I think it's a poem that has so many layers of meaning. It's an absolute classic of English poetry. As always with these poems, I've tried to give you some images to help secure some of the ideas in the poem in your long-term memory. And first of all, we've got this image of after harvest time there being plenty of food. Here we see an abundance of crops. Bottom picture here, we've got people working in the British countryside. An image of Britain which perhaps never existed, but seems to show a really beautiful lifestyle. And down here in the bottom right hand corner, we've got these gathering swallows preparing for their migration back to Africa as winter arrives in Britain. And most importantly, really, even though it's the most simple and the smallest image here, I've got this image of this cycle, this idea of something never ending and going on permanently. As always, if you already know this poem, then pause the video at this point, answer the 3 questions to the best of your ability, and then play the video to see if you got the answers right. Remember to pause the video regularly. You can watch it multiple times. Use the layout on the next slide to take your notes, and if you find them useful, get the images and use them to help secure, like I say, the knowledge in your long-term memory. And remember to test yourself regularly. Little tests, either to yourself or having someone else test you, are absolutely the best way to revise these poems. It makes sure that you can recall the knowledge when you have to, so you'll have it there when you go into the exam and you'll be able to recall it under pressure then. So here's the layout I suggest. Now there's too much in this poem to fit into this little layout, but there's enough here for you to be able to write about the poem in your GCSE exam. 3 language points, 2 structure points, and the other information that you'll need. Obviously, if you want to look more deeply at this poem, then there's loads and loads of essays about this poem that you can read, but this will be enough for you in your GCSE exam. Okay, so the context of this poem. Keats was a romantic poet, and like other romantics, he valued certain things. He valued the imagination at a time where people were being more restricted. He valued nature at a time when people were moving from the countryside to the cities, and he valued personal freedom. Tragically, Keats died when he was only 25. Leaving behind some of the greatest poems in English, but in such a short life. He would have known he was dying. Keats was a medical student earlier in his life, and when he got this illness that we call tuberculosis now, which is totally curable nowadays, it was called consumption then, not tuberculosis, he would have known that it was a life sentence for him. Added to which, he'd already nursed his brother through the same illness leading up to his brother's death. Like other romantics, Keats values nature at a time of growing industrial turmoil in society, with people moving from the countryside and moving to the cities, with England moving from being a country, a nation of farmers, to a nation of city dwellers and industrialists. And he didn't see that loss of nature without feeling some sadness himself. The thing you got to know about this poem, and it's all up here, this poem is an ode. It's called the Ode to Autumn. And an ode is a type of poem like a sonnet is a type of poem. And it's a traditional poem to write about praising something. It goes all the way back to Roman poetry, and you just need to remember that it's a traditional form of English poetry, and Keats is using a traditional form to praise autumn here. Right, we need to talk a little bit about seasons. So I've already explained briefly when we looked at Larkin's poem, Afternoons, that seasons are often used to represent the human life. Spring being childhood, summer being young adulthood, autumn being middle age, and winter being, old age leading to death. And that's used frequently in English literature. So they also can symbolise continuity. The idea of the seasons going round and round. Remember, it doesn't go spring, summer, autumn, winter, stop. It goes spring, summer, autumn, winter, spring, summer, autumn, winter, on and on. This idea of the eternal aspects of nature. Nature will last forever. Well, that's what people believed. Certainly when Keats was writing. Hopefully it will if we stop damaging our own environment. And Keats praises the benefits of this stage of the year. Now, traditionally, you might think that spring and summer would be the times of the year that got most praise, new life and the high points of someone's life. Not autumn, when things are starting to slow down as for someone's life. But Keats says no. He praises autumn. He praises autumn, the season, but also the autumn of his own life. For him, it was the most productive period of his life. That last year or so, when he knew he was dying, he wrote his greatest poetry. Perhaps he knew that if he didn't get it down now, he wouldn't have the chance. But certainly he praises, shows the benefits of this stage. Okay, so stanza 1. I picked out the words fruitfulness, load and bless with fruit, bend with apples, fill all fruit with ripeness, swell the gourd, plump the hazel shells, more and more flowers, never ending. Remember that idea of eternity, this cycle going on, and overflowing the beehives with honey. And the language here is of abundance. There's lots and lots of food. There's plenty of crops. People are not going short. But look, there are no people in this stanza. It's almost as if nature and the sun are doing it for us, providing us with what we need, with plenty. Not just enough, but it's overflowing with food. And we see here that nature is beneficial to man. And I've given you that image of plenty of food with no one going hungry. So this first stanza, very positive, showing the beneficial aspects of nature, giving man plenty to eat. The second stanza then, people actually do show up in this stanza. We've got someone sitting careless on a granary floor, someone half asleep on a half a reaped furrow, cutting the corn, but they've only done half of it and they've fallen asleep. And then down here we've got someone who's patiently watching the oozing out of the apple juice from the cider press as apples are crushed to make cider. But this person's not doing, they're just watching. There is one person, the gleaner, who seems to be walking across a little stream, but they're the only person showing inactivity. It almost makes it look like human beings working in rural England, working on a farm, don't really need to do very much. You just kind of show up, hang about, and nature does it all for you. Keats is showing us that people are all relaxed here. And nature provides without human beings actually doing anything. But we have to remember that that is probably an idealised view of nature. I think that working on a farm in the early 1800s would have been incredibly hard work. The hours would have been long, the work would have been hard. Remember, no machines, everything done by hand, and I bet the pay was small. But Keats paints it, this idea of nature here, as perfect. One of the things which makes this poem a work of genius is these long vowel sounds in the poem, and they go throughout stanza 1 and 2. I've highlighted thou and oozings, which of course is onomatopoeia as well, and hours by hours, but there's loads of them. Look and brook and keep and flowers and drowsed here. You know, these long vowel sounds which create this or emphasize the slow, gentle pace of life. There's no rushing here, and that happens in stanza 1 and stanza 2, showing nature to be this relaxed, easy to get on with. It provides for us without us actually having to do much work. But that changes in stanza 3. And the language here, barred clouds, soft dying day, stubble plains. There's no crops left now, just stubble. Wailful choir mourning. This idea of suggesting death, wailing and mourning, and a choir suggesting some death here. And then in the final 2 lines we've got this bird imagery, a redbreast whistling and gathering swallows. Well, redbreast robins are associated with winter and particularly Christmas, and swallows, well, they're migratory birds. They all get together and fly off to Africa in the winter and fly to Europe in the summer. So when the swallows are gathering in the sky, it implies that winter's coming. And the language is here of something ending, of death and something coming to an end. Well, obviously autumn's ending and it's going to be winter, but then it'll be spring. But so autumn's ending and winter's coming. But remember, Keats's life is also ending. And when we see this sad, melancholy tone, and instead of those long vowel sounds, we get much harsher sounds here. Barred clouds and soft dying day and stubble plains. The sounds are a lot more harsh in this stanza as we're dealing with the end of something. It's something to be sad about. The end of autumn, the coming of winter, but the end of Keats's life as well. Perhaps as well Keats is writing about the end of rural England as people leave the countryside and move to the cities. But again, these layers of meaning in this poem is what makes it so fascinating for me. Okay, my first structural point shows us all three stanzas, and we see it move from the beginning of autumn to the middle of autumn to the end of autumn. Beginning, middle or the harvest, end of autumn down here. So the clear structure showing us this cyclical nature of the seasons. They will go on and on and on. And the structure of Keats's poem shows this. My second structural point, I pick out the final line. It's the boundary between autumn and winter. The gathering swallows are twittering in the skies. When they leave, it's winter. So they mark the boundary between autumn and winter. And this is both reassuring because it means that it will go autumn, winter, spring, summer will come again. And the cycle will continue. But it's also melancholy because if we talk about autumn ending as a human life, we don't get to come again. What comes after our autumn is our winter and the end of our lives. So again, really powerful working on these multiple levels. And again, this reassuring aspect of the cycle of the seasons. So Keats shows us the good side of autumn. He says that autumn's just as valuable a season or just as valuable a time of your life as the other times of your life. And for him it was his most productive time when he wrote his best poetry. We see both the sadness of autumn ending and winter coming, but also the positivity, that autumn's going to end but winter's going to come, and then spring and summer and autumn, and we'll be back around. And this, we call it the cyclical aspect of nature. However, in this poem it's worth remembering with our context that Keats shows us a perfect or idealised side of nature. It wasn't this great at the time in the early 1800s when this poem was written. Working on a farm was not relaxing, but Keats chooses to show us nature as something really beneficial and really beautiful. It's a brilliant poem that makes us see the positive aspects of nature, but also the sadness of Keats's death. Like I say, my favourite poem. I hope you found this useful, and I will see you for the next poem.